and welcome back to the channel. I'm your host Muriel, and in this video I will be doing a little review of the books of the Raksura trilogy made up of The Cloud Roads, The Serpent Sea, and The Siren Depth, written by Martha Wells, which I decided to read because its premise sounded interesting. Yeah, and because I had a pretty positive experience reading Martha Wells' Magician King last year, and no, I have not read her Murderbot Diary series and don't intend to. The books of the Raksura take place in a secondary fantasy world called the Three Worlds, in which there are no standard human beings, if you will, but lots of different humanoid species called groundlings, as well as aquatic species called sealings, not that you actually see much of those in the actual trilogy, and then flying skylings, the most important of which are the Raksura, a species of what I'm going to call dragon anthros, because they look like, well, draconic humanoids, and the Fel, a predatory and parasitic species related to the Raksura. The plot in all three books centers on Moon, a Raksura male consort who grew up isolated from his conspecifics and who, by the start of book 1, so The Cloud Roads, has been living a solitary and nomadic lifestyle for about 40 years? 30 to 40 years. He meets another, much older Raksura consort named Stone, learns that he is, in fact, Raksura, because he didn't know that, and is then persuaded by Stone to accompany him back to his home colony, where he will have to integrate into Raksuran society and face the threat of the Fel, to keep it relatively simple. Books 2 and 3 more or less directly follow on from the story in book 1, with book 2, The Serpent Sea, furthering Moon's character journey of integration and acceptance, and book 3, The Siren Depths, focusing on his origins and ongoing struggles with the Fel as a whole. The books of the Raksura are, I'd say, decently well written overall, with a pretty good balance between descriptive writing, straightforward narration, and character dialogues, and all are written in third person from the exclusive point of view of Moon. I would describe them as being more or less equally plot and character driven, with perhaps a slightly greater emphasis given to character over plot in book 1, since, there's a lot of ground to cover in establishing Moon as the story's protagonist, main character, and in his coming to grips with the fact he is Raksura. This also means book 1, The Cloud Roads, is the slowest to take off in terms of pacing, and as an FYI, it's also the one I enjoyed the least. Books 2 and 3, for their part, are more or less evenly paced, but also become faster paced towards their endings. Speaking of which, each volume's ending felt a little abrupt to me, but not in a way that ever felt too bothersome either. They're all very similar from a structural point of view as well, with prominent, adventurous and action-heavy storylines that take our main characters away from their home base, basically in order to save said home base, taking center stage. This means these books also felt very episodic to me, in a way I'm not really used to anymore when it comes to adult fantasy. The series' character work was also, overall, pretty decent, though it certainly improved with each successive volume. I wasn't too keen on the speed, specifically, with which characters came to like one another or became bonded, an issue I also had with Witch King, interestingly enough, but outside of that, I don't really have any major complaints. Moon's behavior, struggles, and motivations all felt sufficiently realistic and believable to me, as did those of the story's other main characters. I didn't specifically like or care that much about any one of them, outside of Stone, perhaps, or Chime, another male Raksura character, but I'm not a character-driven reader, so that's completely fine. Overall, once again, I am a little disappointed with the world building, and that's principally because I didn't get much beyond the sketch of a world. A well-done sketch, mind you, with quite a bit of breadth to it, yes, but I wanted the more fully realized illustration of a world with more depth to it. There lies the distinction. And it just wasn't there. It didn't feel like the three worlds had a real history, or even a proper three-dimensional sense of time and place. As to its peoples, well, a lot seems to be made on the internet, at any rate, out of the fact the series doesn't feature any human beings, but the majority of the three worlds' groundlings are nothing more than colourful humans with, the odd bit of horn, the odd few scales, or something else of that general nature, so nothing that exotic. As an aside, I wasn't the biggest fan of the nomenclature involved here. Groundlings, sealings, Skylings? I don't know, it all felt a tad, I'm sorry, juvenile to me, and artificial in a way that mildly impacted my immersion, actually. From an anthropological perspective, there was a glaring lack of religious or even spiritual world-building, an issue I had with the Chronicles of Pine books. They are mildly relevant in another way I'll get to shortly. And from a biological perspective, I couldn't tell you if or how any of the three worlds, groundling or sealing species, or even skylings kind of with the Raksura and the Fell, were related to one another. Then, it's not like I could tell you if or how these peoples were related to one another from a historical or cultural perspective either, nor could I tell you much about the world's animals or plant life. There was a lack of definition and, well, rootedness to a lot of the book's descriptions of such things. A lack of depth, like I said. Still, it's not like there weren't any neat elements of world building, right? I especially enjoyed some of the book's geographical settings, such as the Raksura's colossal mountain tree dwellings, which reminded me of Pandora's home trees, Pandora as in the Avatar movies, the city on the back of a Leviathan in the Serpent Sea, I mean it's at the center of its story, or the ruined underwater Forerunner city in the Siren's Depth. I won't specify what the Forerunners are because that would be a plot spoiler. Then, of course, there's the Raksura. Their species building was undoubtedly the most interesting, enjoyable, and memorable part of this trilogy. As already stated, they're basically what I like to call dragon anthros that can shapeshift between a more human-looking form, though they don't really look that human either, but still, and a more fully reptilian-looking one. Though they might have also had feathers. I mean, they had frills and crests and stuff, but they might have had feathers. But I'm not sure because, like I said, there were issues with some of the book's descriptions, and this unfortunately extends to those of the Raksura. In contrast to the Fell specifically, so the way the Fell are described, at times I was like, wait, but I thought that that's what the Raksura looked like. Huh? Anyway, not that it really mattered since I pictured them as, well, just full-on dragons most of the time anyway. Which brings me to an admittedly very small quibble. Why weren't they just, well, full-on dragons? Like in E.E. Knight's Age of Fire cycle, I think it's called. It's a hexalogy I read several years ago. I should probably read it because I remember really enjoying it. Anyway, or I guess, why wouldn't they just full-on weird dragons? Kind of feels like a cop-out to me to have had them be, well, dragon anthros, but I'll admit, that's ultimately down to personal preference, and it's really not a big deal. So moving on, the Raksura are also a species made up of two subtypes. I don't really know what the correct biological term would be for this exactly, so just, yeah, two subtypes, the winged Ariat and the terrestrial Arbora. And the societal structure resembles that of, I want to say, remember, I told you this was going to be relevant, Pernese dragons. So, the alien dragons from the Chronicles of Pern books. Well, kind of. So, Raksura queens, female queens, head the colony and can breed with male consorts, like Moon or Stone, to produce other queens, consorts, or fertile, and then sterile warriors of either sex. The Arbora, for their part, can breed with one another to produce members of different castes, which include crafters, teachers who also take care of the younger reared communally in the species, and then mentors, the species' magic users. Don't expect any sort of magic system in the story though, it's just there, and that's that. The Arbora can also breed with queens and consorts, and this is sometimes encouraged because they believe this will help to get mentors, so the magic users, who can also see into the future, they're seers and prophesiers as well. So if you take all of that into account, the Raksura as a whole can, yes, be thought of as being both matriarchal, somewhat, and broadly sex egalitarian, as well as broadly genderless, which I actually really liked. I thought that was very well done. They're also all basically bisexual by default. Like, bisexual, kind of like bonobos. I don't really think the identity bisexual makes sense for the species, but they all engage in heterosexual and homosexual behavior, or can if they wish to. And then they're all non-monogamous by default as well, though mate preferences and long-term or even lifelong pair bonds exist as well, but there's no marriage, there's no emphasis placed on monogamy, nothing like that. And then I also find it kind of sweet, it's a tiny detail, but I found it kind of sweet that in Raksura society, non-sexual cuddling and just gestures of affection between females, between males and females, and then between males, seemed to be the norm. I thought that was kind of lovely. Unfortunately, their biological relatives, the Fells, species building, relied, for its part, on a rather passé fantasy trope, that of the intrinsically or innately evil species, or race, depending on the case. Progenitors and rulers, the Fel equivalent of Raksura queens and consorts, appear to be fully sentient and conscious beings in the story, yet their species as a whole was also shown to thrive on the kind of gleeful destruction and consumption of other sentient and civilized species. I mean, they could have just eaten, grazing animals and things like that, but no, they purposely went after sentient and civilized species. So they're not just predators or even parasites in the ecological sense of the word. They are, at times at the very least in the story, portrayed as borderline cartoonishly malevolent baddies who all stink to high heaven too. A lot is made of the Fel stench. I mean, come on. It's all a bit antiquated, is it not? Now, there is a smidge of improvement, a smidge of nuance injected into all of this in Book 3, yes, but overall the Fel as a species concept, and in sharp contrast to that of the Raksura, and I really enjoyed the Raksura as a species concept, but the Fel, they left a pretty bad taste in my mouth, not gonna lie here. So ultimately, given these books' rather episodic nature and relative lack of actual theming, beyond a couple of threads concerned with identity and belonging, and, well, as expressed through Moon's character journey, but you'll notice I didn't have a section on theming, because there's just not much to say here. And to paraphrase another reviewer, these books felt to me like bedtime stories for adults. It's really a good way to put it. As such, I found them enjoyably distracting. I enjoyed myself with these books. I'd consider them a palate cleanser. If, my palate had needed to be cleansed, which wasn't actually the case this time, still, I think it counts. I never felt a strong desire to keep going with these books, but they read very quickly. Had neat and fun Bernese-adjacent dragon outros. That's what I'm sticking with. And then, sure, characters I eventually semi-cared about. Okay. So, ratings-wise, The Cloud Roads was a 6 out of 10 for me. The Serpent Sea was a 6.5. And then The Siren Depths, 6.5 to 7 out of 10. So, as a whole, this series was a 6.5 to very soft 7 out of 10 bowl of literary crisps, if you will. Which, isn't bad at all. I'm not complaining here. But I'm definitely ready to move on to something, more fully nutritious now. And yes, I'm aware there are 2 additional books in this series, but they don't immediately follow on from this original trilogy, and they were written and published years after the publication of the original trilogy, and B, I went through several reviews. I mean, I wasn't keen on continuing in any case, because I have planning for my reading schedule and TBR and stuff, but I've read that there's a severe dip in overall quality with these books, so no, I'll pass. I'm good. I'm stopping with these, but I enjoyed them for what they were. So on that final note, I hope you found this little review interesting, engaging, entertaining, that it helped you pass the time. That is always perfectly valid. I mean, if you want to pick these books up now, cool. Let me know. If you've read them and want to talk about them, please do let me know in the comments down below. And so I hope you'll have a lovely day, evening, whichever time of day you prefer. Please do take good care of yourselves. Thank you for watching, as always, and I'll see you all at some point in the next video. But until then, bye-bye.